Your Honor, the defense objects to this line of questioning. This woman has no standing in my courtroom. With respect, Your Honor, my name is Ruth Kamara. I am not a lawyer. I am a custodian at Muskoka General Hospital. I clean floors for a living. But I have read every page of this file, and I am here because every attorney who touched this case missed the same thing. God, ma'am, this is a superior court proceeding. Guy, yes, sir. And my son has been in a cell for 2 years because of a window nobody bothered to look at. Guy, Your Honor, the Crown's time. Guy, your time is fine, Mr. Dunlop. Mine is the time that matters here. He turned to the woman standing at the lectern in a borrowed blazer that did not quite fit her shoulders. Ma'am, what window? To understand how Ruth Kamara ended up standing in that courtroom, you have to go back 3 years to a 2-bedroom rental on Cascade Street in Parry Sound, Ontario, where the pipes knocked every winter and the kitchen smelled permanently of groundnut stew and whatever herb Ruth had drying on the sill that week. She had come to Canada 11 years earlier from Freetown, Sierra Leone, with a degree in structural engineering, a suitcase held shut with a bungee cord, and her son Elijah balanced on her hip. The degree was not recognized. The licensing board required Canadian experience she could not get without a license she could not get without Canadian experience. The circle closed politely, the way Canadian circles do, with a form letter and a suggestion to explore bridging programs. She explored a mop instead. Muskoka General hired her for the night shift. 11 years, not one missed punch. She cleaned the surgical suite so thoroughly that Dr. Aldana once told a resident the floors were cleaner than the instruments. Ruth overheard it through the door and said nothing. She had learned early that pride is a luxury charged by the hour, and hers belonged to other things. Elijah Kamara grew up in that quiet orbit, tall for his age, careful with words, reckless with kindness. He volunteered at the Parry Sound Community Center from the time he was 14, coaching basketball for younger kids on Tuesday and Thursday nights. He painted the mural in the hallway, a swirl of blues and greens that the director said made the building finally look like it belonged to someone. He had his mother's patience and his father's height. His father had stayed behind in Freetown and sent letters for 2 years before the letters stopped. Neither Ruth nor Elijah spoke about that. The community center on Gibson Street was 60 years old, brick and cinder block, drafty in winter, an oven in July. It smelled of floor wax and donated basketballs. Everybody in town had a memory attached to that building. Girl Guide meetings, AA sessions, the Christmas pageant where the donkey bit the narrator. When the building burned, the whole town felt it in the chest. It happened on a Thursday night in October. Elijah had finished his basketball session at 8:30. 3 parents saw him leave through the front doors, gym bag over his shoulder, earbuds in. He walked home the long way because the night was clear and cold and he liked the trail along the water. He was home by 9:15. Ruth was already at work. She would not learn about the fire until her break at midnight, when her phone lit up with 6 messages and a photo of orange light against the sky. The fire started in the mechanical room at the back of the building. A locked room, cinder block walls, steel door, 1 window. Inside were the furnace, the water heater, and 30 years of paint cans and solvent rags that the maintenance budget had never quite gotten around to disposing of. The fire moved fast through those rags, climbed the wall, found the ceiling joists, and spread into the hallway before the alarm even triggered. Gerald Fenn, the night custodian, was mopping the gymnasium when the smoke reached him. He made it out through a fire exit with second-degree burns on his arms and neck. He spent 4 weeks in the burn unit. The town held a fundraiser. The center was a loss. The Ontario Fire Marshal's office sent an investigator named Martin Greaves. He walked the debris for 2 days, took 140 photographs, and filed his report. Origin: mechanical room. Cause: open flame applied to combustible materials. Classification: incendiary. Arson. The police moved quickly. They pulled security footage from the gas station across Gibson Street. The camera caught the front entrance of the community center from an angle. At 8:47, 17 minutes after the parents saw Elijah leave through those same doors, a figure appeared at the side of the building near the mechanical room window. Tall, dark jacket, hood up. The footage was grainy, shot from 40 meters away through a gas station canopy. 17 seconds of a shape in the dark. They arrested Elijah Kamara on a Tuesday morning. He was eating cereal. He put the spoon down and stood up before his mother could reach the kitchen. Ruth heard the handcuffs click from the hallway and arrived in time to see her son's face, calm and confused in equal measure, as two officers guided him toward the door. "Mom," he said. Just the word. Nothing after it. They charged him with arson causing bodily harm. Crown Attorney Craig Dunlop held a press conference on the courthouse steps that afternoon. The evidence, he said, was substantial, and the Crown would seek the maximum. The cameras loved him. He had a voice built for certainty and a suit that fit like it had opinions of its own. Bail was set at $40,000. Ruth had $6,000 in savings. She called every number she had ever written down. A church in Bracebridge took up a collection. Dr. Aldana contributed quietly through an envelope left at the nurse's station. It was not enough. Elijah waited in the Parry Sound jail for 4 months before trial. His legal aid lawyer was a man named Trevor Sykes, who arrived at their first meeting 14 minutes late with mustard on his cuff. He told Elijah the case was manageable and suggested he consider a plea. 12 years down to 6 with good behavior. "I didn't do it," Elijah said. Sykes nodded the way people nod when they are already thinking about lunch. The trial lasted 3 days in the Superior Court in Bracebridge. Ruth sat in the second row every day in the same gray cardigan. She brought a notebook because Elijah had always teased her about remembering everything except where she put her glasses, and she was not going to forget a single word spoken in that room. Dunlop was surgical. He played the footage 4 times. He showed the jury photos of Gerald Fenn's burns, pink and tight across his forearms. He brought the gas station attendant to the stand, who testified that the figure on camera was about that height, about that build. He pointed at Elijah when he said it. The investigator, Greaves, testified that the fire was deliberately set. Open flame to solvent rags. Whoever did it had access to the mechanical room. Dunlop let the sentence sit in the air like smoke. Sykes cross-examined Greaves for 9 minutes. He asked nothing about the mechanical room door, nothing about whether it was locked, nothing about the window. He asked if Greaves was absolutely certain it was arson, and Greaves said yes, and Sykes said no further questions, as though certainty were a wall he could not climb. In the second row, Ruth wrote 4 words in her notebook. He never asked about access. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, guilty. Ruth did not make a sound. She sat perfectly still, hands flat on the notebook while the room moved around her. Elijah turned and found her eyes. He shook his head once, not in denial, in instruction. Don't. Judge Helen McAllister handed down the sentence 2 weeks later, 12 years. Elijah stood straight, the way Ruth had taught him to stand when the world to puff. His hands were cuffed in front of him, and he held them steady the way a man holds something he has decided not to drop. On the courthouse steps, Dunlop told reporters that justice had been thorough and fair. Ruth walked past him to the parking lot. She sat in her car for 11 minutes, with the engine off and her forehead against the steering wheel. Then she drove to Muskoka General and clocked in 40 minutes early because grief does not pay rent and neither does sitting in a parking lot. What followed was the long subtraction of a life coming apart. Ruth's landlord raised the rent. She sold the car and took the bus, which added 90 minutes to each shift. She ate 1 meal a day so she could put money on Elijah's commissary account. The mural he had painted in the community center hallway was gone. The building was demolished by December. Nobody saved the wall. Visits to the Central North Correctional Center happened every other Saturday. 2 hours on a Greyhound to Penetanguishene, then a local bus, then a walk. Ruth learned the visiting room the way she had learned the hospital corridors, by feel, by the weight of the air. She always brought a book for Elijah. The guards checked every spine for contraband. She understood. Rules are rules. One Saturday in February, Elijah came to the table thinner than the month before. A bruise sat high on his temple, fading to yellow at the edges. He said he had bumped a bunk frame in the dark. He smiled when he said it. The smile was what Ruth could not forgive. Not the bruise, but the lie attached to it. The instinct to protect her from a place she could not reach. "Who did this?" she said. "Mom, it's fine, Elijah." He looked down at his hands. "It's handled. Tell me about work." She told him about work. She told him Dr. Aldana had brought samosas to the break room. She did not tell him she had been rereading his trial transcript every night at the kitchen table, marking it in red pen the way she used to mark structural drawings in another life, looking for the load-bearing failure that everyone else had walked past. She found it on a Sunday morning in March, sitting at the kitchen table, with the fire investigator's report and a cup of tea gone cold 2 hours earlier. Greaves's report was thorough. 46 pages, 140 photographs, appendices for chemical analysis and thermal modeling. On page 19, under origin determination, he described the mechanical room in detail. Steel door, locked at the time of fire. Cinder block walls. One window, north-facing, single pane. He noted the window dimensions and moved on. Ruth had read page 19 30 times. She had never thought to look at photograph 47. It was a wide shot of the mechanical room's north wall after the fire. Charred studs, melted conduit, the window frame warped but intact, and around the frame, visible even through the soot, a thick bead of paint bridging the sash to the sill, sealed shut. Ruth set down her tea. She went to the closet and pulled out the box of documents she had obtained from the courthouse through an access request that took her 4 months and $62 in copying fees. She found the Crown's submissions, the section titled Theory of Access. There it was, page 9. The accused, having no key to the mechanical room, is believed to have entered through the north-facing window, which provided the only alternate means of access. The entire case hung on that window. Elijah had no key. The door was locked. The Crown told the jury he climbed through the window, and in the investigator's own photograph, the window was painted shut. She checked again. She pulled up the manufacturer's specifications for the paint used on municipal buildings in the district, cross-referenced with the center's maintenance logs from 2016, the last time that room was painted. 6 coats over 30 years, the last one a latex industrial primer that bonded like cement in Ontario cold. Nobody had opened that window. The paint seal was unbroken. It was visible in the photograph. It had been in the file from the first day. Ruth put her head down on the table and breathed for a long time. Then she stood up and began to work. She did not know how to file a legal motion. She learned. The Parry Sound library had a legal self-help section that fit on one shelf, and Ruth read every book on it in 3 weeks. She found the phrase she needed. Extraordinary remedy. Fresh evidence application. She found the form. She filled it out 11 times because the first 10 had errors she caught on rereading. The filing fee was $210. She picked up extra shifts for a month. She also found Donald Firth. Donald was 73, retired from the Parry Sound Fire Department after 31 years, the last 8 as captain. He came into the library every Wednesday for the crossword and a quiet place to avoid his wife's television habits. He had noticed Ruth at the legal shelf the way you notice someone carrying something heavy. One Wednesday, he sat down across from her. "That's a fire marshal's report," he said. "Yes, sir." "You know how to read one of those?" Ruth looked at him over her glasses. "I have a degree in structural engineering from the University of Sierra Leone. I can read a building the way you read a crossword, Mr. Firth. I just cannot get anyone in this country to believe that." Donald Firth was not a man who was easily surprised, but he sat back in his chair and reassessed the woman in front of him the way he used to reassess a fire when the smoke changed color. "Show me what you've got," he said. She showed him the photograph, the paint seal, the Crown's theory. Donald studied the photo with a magnifying glass he carried in his jacket because reading glasses were, in his words, an admission of weakness. "That window hasn't moved in years," he said quietly. "Look at the oxidation on the latch. That's not post-fire, that's old." "I know." The investigator missed this. He noted the window. He photographed the window. He did not look at the paint around the window. He was not asked to. Nobody was asked to. Donald took off the magnifying glass and folded his hands on the table, the way a man does when he has decided something. "What do you need from me?" "I need an expert who can say under oath that this paint seal was intact before the fire, that nobody opened that window. I'm retired." "So is the truth in this case, Mr. Firth. I'm trying to wake it up." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, the way old firemen nod, with the whole body. The motion was filed in June. Ruth hand-delivered it to the courthouse because she did not trust the mail with her son's life. The clerk looked at the return address, looked at Ruth, and said, "You know you need a lawyer for this, right?" "The form does not require one," Ruth said. "I checked." 6 weeks of silence. Ruth checked the mailbox before work every single day. When the letter from the Superior Court arrived in August, she held it to the light from the hallway window and read the watermark before she opened the seal. Motion granted. Evidentiary hearing. The Honorable Justice R.A. Munoz presiding. She told Elijah on the next visit. He listened without moving. Then he said, "Mom, the window, the window." He leaned back and pressed his palms against his eyes, and his shoulders shook once. Just once. Then he put his hands down, and his face was clear. "They're going to fight you," he said. "I expect they will. You're not a lawyer." "No. I am a structural engineer who cleans floors, and I can read a building better than anyone in that courtroom." The hearing fell on a Tuesday in November, 2 years and 13 days after the gavel first came down on Elijah Kamara. Word had spread. The courtroom in Bracebridge held more people than the trial ever drew. Gerald Fenn sat in the third row, his scars visible above his collar, watching with an expression that could have been anger or patience or both. Donald Firth wore a tie for the first time in 4 years. The librarian from Parry Sound closed her desk early. 3 nurses from Muskoka General took the morning off without explaining why. Elijah entered through the side door in the suit Ruth had bought from a consignment shop in Huntsville. It was charcoal gray and fit him almost right. He kept touching the cuffs the way a man touches something that used to be ordinary. His eyes found his mother at the front table with a stack of folders, and for a moment his composure broke, not into tears, but into something closer to disbelief. She was here. She had always been here. Dunlop arrived early. He had brought an associate and a box of files. He looked exactly as polished as before. The election for regional crown was 8 months away. He paused at the petitioner's table on his way past. "Mrs. Kamara, the court extends considerable latitude in these matters." "But latitude is not competence." "No, sir," Ruth said without looking up. "Competence is what I'm here to demonstrate." Justice Munoz took the bench at 10 sharp. He was new to the district, transferred from Sudbury, with a reputation for brevity and an allergy to theater. Ruth stood. "Ruth Kamara, for the petitioner, Your Honor. I am not a lawyer. I am Elijah Kamara's mother and the person who identified the evidence this court has not yet seen. With the court's permission, I will present it myself." "Your Honor, the Crown objects," Dunlop said, already rising. "A layperson cannot present argument in a superior court proceeding. This is irregular at best. It is an evidentiary hearing, Mr. Dunlop, not a trial. The court has discretion over who may address it, and I have reviewed Mrs. Kamara's written submissions. They are more thorough than motions I have received from licensed counsel." He looked at Ruth. "You may proceed, ma'am." "Within limits. Thank you, Your Honor." Ruth opened her folder. Her hands were steady. 11 years of surgical suites had taught her how to work in rooms where steadiness is not optional. "Your Honor, the conviction of Elijah Kamara rests on a single theory, that he entered the mechanical room of the Parry Sound Community Center through the north-facing window on the night of October 14th and deliberately started a fire. The Crown presented this theory at trial. The defense did not challenge it. I am here to show the court that the theory is physically impossible. She walked them through it. The mechanical room. The steel door, locked that evening by the center's operations manager, Beverly Poole, at 6:30 when she left for the day. Only 3 staff members held keys: Poole, the director, and the maintenance contractor. Elijah was a volunteer. He had never held a key to that room. The window. The Crown told the jury the window was the point of entry. No one tested it. No one examined it. Defense Exhibit A, Ruth said, and placed the photograph on the document camera. The north wall of the mechanical room. Charred, ruined. And in the middle of the frame, the window, its sash visibly fused to the sill by a thick ridge of paint that had survived the fire because latex primerite does not burn the same way wood does. It melts, it blackens, but the bead was unbroken. This is the Crown's own evidence, Ruth said. Photograph 47 from the fire marshal's report. It has been in this file since the week of the fire, and it shows a window that has not been opened in years. Dunlop stood immediately. Objection. The petitioner is not a qualified expert in building materials or fire science. She is speculating about a photograph. I am not speculating, Your Honor. I have a degree in structural engineering, and I have brought someone who can speak to the physical evidence. She called Donald Firth. Donald took the stand the way old professionals take stands, without hurry, without nerves. He stated his credentials: 31 years in fire service, 8 as captain, certified in fire origin and cause investigation. He had examined the photograph, visited the demolition site, and recovered a section of the window frame that the town had stored in a municipal yard because no one had told them to throw it away. The paint seal on this window was intact prior to the fire, Donald said. Multiple coats of latex primer applied over decades, bonded to both the sash and the sill. I tested the recovered section. The seal was unbroken. This window had not been opened in a minimum of 6 years based on the oxidation of the latch mechanism. The courtroom was very quiet. Dunlop cross-examined for 20 minutes. He suggested the fire could have melted the paint and resealed the window. Donald explained patiently that heat travels upward, that the base of the window showed no thermal distortion consistent with rebonding, and that latex primer does not reseal itself like wax. Dunlop pivoted. Perhaps the accused found another way in, a vent, a ceiling panel. Your Honor, Ruth said, standing, I would like to call the Crown's own investigator. He looked older than his report. He sat with his hands folded and his jaw tight. He had not expected to be back in this courtroom. Ruth climbed the lectern. She did not open a folder. She had one question, and she knew it by heart. Mr. Greaves, in your report you described the mechanical room as having 4 cinder block walls, a steel door, and 1 window. Are there any other points of entry to that room? Greaves blinked. Of all the questions he had prepared for, this was not one. There was nothing to hedge, nothing to calculate. No, he said. It's a sealed utility space. 1 door, 1 window, cinder block on all 4 sides. No vents large enough for access. No ceiling panels. I noted that in my report. Ruth let the answer settle. Then she said very quietly, 1 door, locked. 1 window, sealed shut with 6 years of paint. No other way in. And the Crown's theory is that my son, a 20-year-old volunteer with no key, walked through a wall. Nobody moved. Somewhere in the gallery, someone exhaled, and it sounded like the whole room breathing out at once. Dunlop was on his feet. The petitioner is making argument, not asking questions. I withdraw the comment, Your Honor. Ruth stepped back from the lectern. The evidence speaks for itself. But she was not finished. She placed one more document on the camera. Defense Exhibit C, the Parry Sound Community Center key log obtained through a municipal Freedom of Information request. 3 keys to the mechanical room were issued. 1 to Beverly Poole, operations manager. 1 to the center director, Graham Halliday, who was in Barry that evening at a conference, confirmed by hotel records, and 1 to the maintenance contractor, Lyle Chambers. She paused. Mr. Chambers resigned from his contract 6 weeks after the fire and moved to Alberta. He was never interviewed. The courtroom stirred. Justice Munoz wrote something on his notepad. Dunlop did not object because there was nothing to object to. It was a public record, read aloud, and it pointed in a direction no one had ever bothered to walk. "Your Honor," Ruth said, "every piece of physical evidence in this case says the same thing. The door was locked. The window was sealed. Only a key holder could have entered that room. My son did not have a key. He was never asked if he had a key because no one needed to ask. They had 17 seconds of footage of a shape in the dark that was the right height and the right color, and that was enough." She gathered her folder and sat down. Elijah was looking at her with an expression she had last seen when he was 5 years old, and she had carried him up 3 flights of stairs during a power outage in their first Canadian winter, and he had said, "Mama, you are very strong," in a voice full of discovery. Justice Munoz called a recess. 40 minutes. Nobody left. The air in the courtroom had changed the way air changes before weather. When he returned, he read from a single page, and his voice was level and clear. "This court finds that the conviction of Elijah Kamara was based on a theory of access that is contradicted by the Crown's own physical evidence. The petitioner has demonstrated, through the fire marshal's own photographs and the testimony of a qualified expert, that the sole alternative entry point to the mechanical room was physically sealed at the time of the fire. The Crown's theory is not merely unsupported. It is impossible." He turned a page. "The key log further raises questions that were never investigated. This court vacates the conviction. The Crown is directed to advise within 60 days whether it intends to proceed with a new trial or withdraw the charge. Mr. Kamara, you are released effective immediately, and this court extends to you its regret that the process took as long as it did." The gavel came down, and the sound it made was small and dry. Nothing close to loud enough for what it meant. A deputy crossed to Elijah and removed the handcuffs. The click they made coming off was the only sound in the room. Elijah stood there rubbing his wrists, looking at his hands like they belonged to someone he was just now remembering. Ruth reached him in 3 steps. She was not a tall woman. Her arms barely closed around his shoulders. But she held him the way she had held him the night they landed at Pearson Airport 11 years ago, in a country that did not know their names yet, with everything they owned in a suitcase held shut with a bungee cord. She held him like a structure she had built and was not willing to let the wind take. Elijah pressed his face against her shoulder. "You found it," he said, into the gray cardigan she had worn to every day of both proceedings. "Mom, you found it. You taught me where to look," she said. "Every time I visited, every time you told me about your week, I saw a building that did not deserve to fall. So I looked for the fault in the foundation. That is what engineers do." The gallery stood. The nurses stood first, then the firemen, then everyone. Gerald Fenn stood slowly, his scarred arms at his sides, and nodded once toward the woman at the front of the room. Whatever he had come to feel, it was not anger. It was something quieter, and it cost him, and he let it. Justice Munoz did something his clerk had never seen. He descended from the bench, crossed the floor, and stopped in front of Ruth Kamara. "Mrs. Kamara, I have read submissions from every law firm between here and Toronto. Yours was the clearest I have received this year. I clean surgical suites for a living, Your Honor. Clarity is not optional in my work." Something moved behind his eyes that might have been a smile. "No," he said. "I don't suppose it is." Dunlop packed his files without assistance. His associate had already left at the rail. He paused. He did not apologize. Men like Dunlop do not carry that word easily. But he said, to Ruth and to no one else, the Crown will not oppose the withdrawal. It was the most he could offer. Ruth accepted it, the way she accepted everything the system gave her, with her eyes open and her back straight. Lyle Chambers was arrested in Red Deer, Alberta, 4 months later. He had outstanding debts to 3 creditors and a history of insurance fraud in 2 provinces. The fire, investigators would conclude, had been set to destroy records he had stored in the mechanical room, records that connected him to overbilling the Center for Maintenance work he never performed. He had not known Gerald Fenn was in the building. He had not cared enough to check. The province paid Elijah Kamara a settlement for the 2 years it had taken from him. The number had a lot of zeros in it. Ruth told him to invest most of it and spend a little on something foolish. He bought a pickup truck and drove it straight to the hardware store because the Parry Sound Community Center Rebuild Committee needed volunteers, and Elijah Kamara had never once been asked to volunteer and said no. Ruth still works the night shift at Muskoka General. She was offered a desk job after the case made the news. She declined. "I like the quiet," she told the charge nurse, "and the floors need someone who pays attention." But on Wednesday afternoons, she sits at a corner table in the Parry Sound Library with a retired fire captain and a stack of case files that arrive from legal aid clinics across Ontario. Because it turns out there are a lot of locked rooms in this country, with a lot of sealed windows that nobody has bothered to photograph properly. Donald Firth framed exactly one thing from his 31 years in the fire service and hung it in his garage. It is not a commendation or a certificate. It is a photocopy of a single page from a fire investigator's report. Photograph 47, with a handwritten note in the margin in neat, careful letters. The window was never open. I told this story because the justice system nearly buried a man, and the only person stubborn enough to dig was a woman the whole country had decided was qualified to hold a mop and nothing else. Credentials are paper. Competence is bone. And the truth does not care who finds it, only that somebody does. So here is my question for you. If you had been sitting in that courtroom when a hospital custodian in a borrowed blazer stood up and said she had found what every lawyer missed, would you have listened? Or would you have looked at her hands and decided they were the wrong hands for the job? Be honest. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting to be told. Look closer.